Hello everyone. So I want to share a little bit of what's written in this book, In God We Trust, and it's a book the Lord had called me to write in this last year, and it's available on Amazon. So I wanted to share some of the messages that I was writing in this book. So prior to my run for Congress, I had a series of dreams and encounters that made me aware that the spirit of servitude was slipping into American culture. My first vision showed many American families displaced from their suburban homes, and they were put into government holding camps. Each person was given a number. So I saw many people being registered in what looked to be a large cafeteria, kind of holding camps and just large facilities. And no one had the right to their own destiny or their own property. So I also saw generations of people from multiple nations and ethnicities rise and fall, each of them distinctly in military apparel. So I was shown a red book hidden under a pile of kitty litter, and this was given to me during a dream. And when I woke up, I asked the Lord, what does this mean? The symbolism in dream is quite unique. So I saw basically a red book hid under a pile of kitty litter. So he said to me, the people represent nations and peoples that have fallen to the sword due to the promises in this little red book. And the kitty litter represented a cover-up. So cat litter covers the smell of animal feces. And the new leaders of this movement are trying to cover up the stench of past horrors of socialism. And some of those horrors are famines, murder, and servitude. Many people have been persecuted and murdered under these teachings. The little red book represents the philosophy of socialism. I wanted to share that the Chinese communist leader Mao published a little red book like the one shown in my dream about socialist propaganda. So at the time of my dream, I was actually unfamiliar with Mao's red book. So this was a further confirmation from the Lord. So more than 60 million Chinese citizens were murdered when the Chinese Socialist Party gained power in China. Landowners were shot and killed, and workers were given part of their property for a time to be transferred. They were given the property for a time, and then it was transferred back to the socialist leaders and the Socialist Party. So another dream that I was shown was the youth of America dressing up in communist apparel. So they were dressed just like Fidel Castro, including a beard and a mustache. I saw a line of cars in traffic, and I looked in the rear window of my car and saw a group of youth. I was later shown the same youth dressed in communist apparel. So in the dream, I tried to inform them that communism was not cool, hoping they would listen to me. So I believe the cars represented generations of people. So the car behind me represented a generation behind me or a younger generation. So every generation wants to represent something big and purposeful to promote change in some way. The problem begins is when we're not taught world history, because history can repeat itself. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Good intentions don't necessarily mean good outcomes. So it's very important that we study history and understand world history and what's happened in other nations. So the first dream actually followed a chance encounter with two people the very next week who had fled communist Bulgaria. Each meeting was completely separate from the other, and neither person knew the other. So while I was attending a weekly Bible study at a Presbyterian church, I felt the Lord prompt me to share my dream. And it was the dream about servitude and these holding camps where people were being registered. After doing so, one of the women in the class said it reminded her of communist Bulgaria. She said that when she was a young girl, her family had to flee Bulgaria due to political persecution. Her father was a pastor, and the Socialist Party was targeting him as a nonconformist. So this was a further confirmation that the dream was very significant. If that wasn't the only significant thing, later that same week, an elderly man walked into my gallery. He complimented the artwork in my gallery and told me he was a photographer. He said that he was from Bulgaria and had captured many pictures of people during the communist era. So I asked to see his work and his images, and they were immensely beautiful and riveting. Most of the pictures were taken in the mid-1980s up to 1989, but the people resembled those from the kind of like the Depression era or the 1929. If I would have just seen the images as an American, I would have thought they were dated back in the 1920s because of the poverty or the state of the situation of the people. So he further unfolded the story behind each image, and so many brought me to tears. The stories displayed the resilience of the human spirit and the corrupt heart of man when given power over others, and the corrupt heart, how government can be ultimately corrupted. So at this point, I knew the Lord was speaking in a very clear and tangible way. The spirit of socialism / communism was coming to America, and I needed to pray and stand against it, or America would end up like Bulgaria. I was willing to do anything the Lord asked, which included spending significant amount of time and money to run for Congress. And I felt strongly that's where the Lord was leading. So Bulgaria suffered economic decline after World War II, and the Socialist Party took its rise because people were desperately seeking help to rebuild their nation. And the Bulgarians elected a socialist government, which led to the final legal election in that country. Once the socialists took over, they kept their grip over the people through fraudulent elections all the way to 1989, when their leader was eventually killed and thrown out of office. He was killed. So the Bulgarian people greatly suffered under the socialist regime, and their abundant promises counted for nothing. People were removed from their home, their family property, wealth was redistributed, and every private business was shifted over and owned by the government. So thousands of Bulgarians were murdered or sent to labor camps for being nonconformist. Especially wealthy, educated, or anyone that seemed to be a threat to the communist system was put in a holding or work camp where, poor food, poor treatment. People lived in fear of speaking against the government because they would either be thrown into a prison camp or put into mental institutions and tortured. The photographer had told me his father spent time in a prison camp and some of his friends were killed by the government. So his dream was to finally come to America, where men could be free to speak, free to create, free to live. So his dreams finally came true after the communist government collapsed in 1989 and his family moved to America. After his arrival, however, he was visiting a Detroit library and saw a young American man dressed like Stalin, preaching and sharing books about communism and socialism. So the photographer thought, how can this young man be so stupid? Does he not know how many people have suffered and died? Later, he had a conversation with the young man to help straighten out his understanding and to share his experience, and hopefully that had some impact on him. So the photographer used the terms socialism and communism interchangeably. He told me there was no difference between the two systems. Socialism was a door to put all power and control of resources in the hands of government and keep them under a communist model. Both systems preach an unattainable utopia at the hands of government, promises upon promises, all of which lead to death and destruction. Communist regimes are responsible for more than 200 million deaths of their own people, and that's called democide. This is referred to death by democide, meaning death by the hands of your government. So I just wanted to share, this is some of the words the Lord had given me prior to my run for Congress. The book is In God We Trust, A Nation Under Judgment, and a Call to Repentance. So freedom is a blessing from the Lord. But as societies progressively trust in government, and sometimes secular societies can go more towards trusting in man than having freedom and trusting in God. Now, America has a foundation built on freedom and trusting in God. We even wrote in our money. Now, that God we trust in might be different, comparable to different people, but the founders that founded this nation, most of them were either Christian, or